Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. Ben McCormick here with Clinton Weaver, where we're going to talk about what's next. Duke lost to UConn. All our hearts are broken, and now we got to move on. That's a difficult thing to do any offseason. I think it is especially difficult in this offseason, given the context of the UConn loss, right? There's so many fan bases that complain about how difficult it is to bounce back year in, year out from roster reconstruction now in the NIL era. Well, the truth is, Duke's been doing that a lot longer than everybody else. And so they're a lot better at it than most. But at the same time, it's really, really hard to bounce back from a loss like this when you don't retain everybody. Like it used to be, Duke lost in 1990 to UNLV by 30 points in the national championship. They brought back pretty much that entire team. They brought back most of that team, and then they added Grant Hill, right? They had so many guys that remembered what it felt like. They remembered that visceral feeling in their heart, that just horrible feeling. And they came back and they delivered. They beat UNLV the next year. They won the national title. 2016 Carolina, right? They get the shot hit on them by Chris Jenkins. They lose at the buzzer in the national championship. Yeah, they lose Marcus Page and Bryce Johnson, but everybody else comes back and they remember what it felt like. And so they come back, they win the national championship the next year. It's become really difficult for Duke to come back and remember what it felt like. I'll always remember the reaction of Trey Jones to losing in 2019. And he did come back, right? Like he was just weeping because he didn't get to have that same experience that his brother did. For them to lose the way they did in 2019, it hurt. He came back and he didn't get to see it through in 2020. And my heart always broke for him because of that. But so many of these top level players, they don't come back. They don't get the chance to fight through that heartbreak and finally raise the trophy at the end of it, right? And that has become increasingly the case. But Duke has had so many heartbreaks throughout this one and done and now NIL era. In 2018, they lose to Kansas in overtime in the Elite Eight in a game where there's the Wendell Carter block charge call that was botched, and then Grayson Allen's potential game winner rolls in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out and finally falls out. And after that game, you're thinking, man, I mean, well, it can't really get any worse than this. Lose a shot at the Final Four in this heartbreaking of a fashion. And then the next season, you have the number one overall team, national championship favorite, and they lose by 1 point. RJ Barrett misses free throws at the end of that game, and automatically you've already outdone yourself. You have a more painful loss somehow. And then 3 years later, in their next tournament appearance in 2022, you lose Coach K's last game to your rival in the Final Four. And after that, you're thinking, there's literally no way it can get worse than this. There's no chance that it could possibly be worse than this. Except, well, 2023, not so bad. Team with not a ton of expectations loses in the second round. 24, yeah, you lost in the Elite Eight to a, in quotations, in-state rival. But it didn't really hurt all that much because I think everybody knew that Duke team wasn't going to win the national championship had they made the Final Four. But then 2025 happens, and you blow a 14-point lead, including like 10 different instances in which you could look at the score at the last 2 minutes of the game and go, how's it even possible that they lost this game? And they do, and they lose to Houston, and that's a Duke team that was almost a shoo-in to be the national champion. And so now that becomes your most painful loss. And you go, well, that's like the best team I can ever imagine losing. It can't get worse than this. It's only going to be like, oh, they'll lose in the Sweet 16. They'll flame out or something. And then this year, somehow, they blow the largest lead ever blown by a one seed, and it ends in one of the most hectic and instantly recognizable plays in the history of basketball with a near half-court game winner hit on you with 0.3 of a second on the clock. And suddenly now you have somehow outdone yourself again. And I have no idea how it gets any worse than this. But what I do know is that I want as many players from this team back as possible because I want guys that remember this hurt.
Well, I suppose there's something to be said for that. We saw with UVA how they came back from their worst loss ever to UMBC as the number one seed, and then came back the next year, won the national championship. And Duke had to lose by 30 to UNLV before they could win their first. sometimes you got to go through the the troughs and the low points to get to the high points. Just through a learning process. I think what makes it difficult, like you say, is the players don't tend to come back, and we're wiping the slate clean every year. Uh, at least in terms of the starting five for the most part. And it's a complete do-over, new roster, and they haven't lived through the pain of the previous lows, and maybe that makes them more susceptible to doing it all over again. So it's going to be interesting to see who stays, who goes. Can we have a good nucleus to come back and build off of the pain of this year and the learning that encompasses to take it, hopefully, in a different direction when it comes closing time in March.
Well, before we do sort of a player by player, what do we think about them staying or going, and talk about what the possible rotation could look like in 2026 27. Let's talk about the fact that this time last year, soon after this time last year, we were talking about, man, next year's going to be a real drop off, right? Like next year's team's just, it's not going to be as good as this one. When you look at the guys that are going to be leading the team, they're not the same level of guys. They're not going to be in the same positions. But at the end of the day, they were, right? They went 35-3. They actually had they actually did have a better record technically, even though they got out a round earlier. Half a game better record because they played one less game. Um, but they did phenomenally. They got the number one overall seed. They somehow exceeded the regular season that the 24-25 team had, which was unthinkable at this time a year ago. But here I am going to say I don't know how the 26-27 team will live up to the last two seasons. It feels undoable. It feels like they're going to fall short of that expectation. But then again, maybe they won't. They don't have the same Haas. They don't have the Cooper flag. They don't have the Cameron Boozer. Yes, Cameron Williams and Deron Rippey, Bryson Howard, they're very good freshmen. I don't think any of them are quite flag or Boozer esque. But maybe they don't need that. I don't know. Can they live up to that expectation? Maybe, but it certainly doesn't feel very likely at this moment.
There's some opportunities. I'd love to see Gongba come back for one, and get a third year out of him, and maybe with his poor performance coming down the stretch, and the questions about whether he is going to be injury prone, maybe that works in our favor. Would be a key piece, I think, to build around, and Caden, of course, as well. Dame. There's a number of people here who are not quite good enough to go pro, and maybe that's a good thing to have people at that level where they've been improving. They're not quite good enough to go pro. That means maybe stay another year and build on those lessons of the past where you have some institutional memory. I think about Jay Billis, and when he talked to the team, he said, "You don't want to live with that one regret of that one thing that you didn't do." He was talking about a box out that happened for him against Louisville, or didn't happen, and led to the winning play. So that's the kind of institutional memory or individual memory that you have to build off of sometimes. Go through those painful moments to get to the good ones.
So I have everybody on this year's rotation put into 7 tiers, from like we absolutely know they're gone to maybe not so much. It's down the spectrum, right? The first tier is the literally cannot come back tier. That's Malik Brown. He's out of eligibility. What Duke loses without Malik Brown is a lot. They lose a guy that makes championship plays, that does little things that you don't normally get a player that's that elite at, right? What I want to talk about here is that there is kind of a spot, and when we talk about rotation, we'll talk more about this. There's a spot in next year's rotation where Duke could probably use a portal big man, right? Probably as a reserve, but maybe as a starter, depending on how they play things. There are a lot of Duke fans that are constantly like, you know, Why don't we have like a Yaxel Lindeborg? Why don't we have this level of a transfer? Well, John Shire did go after Cedric Coward last year. That's really the only guy he went full out after. And that didn't work out, right? But he knew the guy he wanted and he went after him. I think Shire's very selective. You're going to see a lot of shiny names come up that are entering the transfer portal, and Duke fans are always going to be like, "Oh, Shire, go after him, go after him." It's like it's not maybe doable because Duke has a lot of freshmen coming in that are going to command a lot of playing time. They're going to have a lot of guys return from this team that are going to command a lot of playing time. And here's the pitch because I heard it so much this year, especially over the past few weeks when Patrick Gongba was injured, that it was like Shire really needed to go out and get another big man in the portal last year. Well, here's my counter argument to that. Duke had Cameron Boozer, Patrick Gongba, and Malik Brown. They knew they had those three guys, and they were going to play pretty much every second of front court minute available. What was your pitch to some guy that is a meaningful, contributing player that can be just thrown into the rotation on the number one overall team and immediately contribute and contribute meaningfully? What's your pitch to that guy? You're going to go, okay, well, come to Duke and we'll play you if Malik Brown or Patrick Gongba gets hurt. Otherwise, you're going to play like 3 minutes of spot minutes here and there. Where there's an SEC team or a Big Ten team that's going, oh, actually, we'll guarantee you 25 minutes a game. You're going to start, and we're going to pay you $2 million more. Like Duke's not going to. They're in a market, a very specific market, when it comes to a big man in that circumstance, and in certain other years where it's like they're not going to get these heavy hitter guys because they don't have the opportunity to offer them, and they can't guarantee it. They can tell you can try to work for it, but we're not going to guarantee it like other schools will. And so you're going to get these these dudes that are used to being a second, third, fourth fiddle on a team. Like they're not the guy. They have no illusions that they're the guy. And that was Ryan Young for the first couple of years of John Shire's tenure, and it was Malik Brown for the past two. I think that, that's the kind of player you're looking at probably if you're in the market for a backup big if you're Duke. You're going to get a guy from another elite academic institution. You're going to get a guy who does the little things and can be a leader, but isn't necessarily this high volume player that isn't necessarily a first round NBA draft upside player. Like that might not be the guy Duke's going to get. And so I warn people not to get too all up in arms at John Shire going, why aren't you going after these guys? These teams that are winning championships are getting these guys because the way that Duke is constructing its roster is different than those teams. And they're just not going to nab those level of transfers, not typically.
Well, I'm glad that Shire and Duke approach it the way that they do, where they're not making promises of playing time. I think they're looking for character guys. Coach K used to talk about how he wanted to see how the recruit interacted with his mother, because that for him was a key indicator of success. But I think that's continued to a degree with Shire, looking for character guys, people with a defensive mindset. Who are going to come in and work, who are going to be promised nothing but the opportunity. And that's the way it should be. Duke has the luxury of being picky. And, the word is, who Shire wants, Shire gets. He's working for the number one brand in basketball. And that's a really, really good position to be in.
So here's the second tier. The second tier is they don't actually technically have to leave from an eligibility standpoint, but if you think they're coming back, all you're doing is needlessly praying. That's Cam Boozer and Isaiah Evans. If you have any delusion that either of those guys is going to be wearing Duke blue next season, go ahead and nip that in the bud. Cam and Isaiah are going to the NBA. There is zero chance that either of them is back. Cameron Boozer is an extra 0% chance. I guess Isaiah Evans, there might be a 0.00001 chance. Like his draft stock's not that high. I think it should be higher than it is, frankly. I think he's a high level shooter that has shown a willingness to improve and compete on defense that could make him a really valuable 3-and-D player in the NBA. And frankly, he would get looks much more easily in the NBA because opposing defenses aren't going to put so much attention on him on ball screens and off ball screens to try to keep him off the 3-point line. He's going to get so many more looks. He's going to shoot a higher rate, higher percentage in the NBA. I don't know why he has slid to be a late first round pick on a lot of mocks. I would take him closer to the lottery if it were me. And I do think he is going to perform really well in the combine, and that's going to improve his stock. I think there's no chance he's coming back. There's no chance Cameron Boozer's coming back. Now the question is, well, what do you do to replace the production you lose from those guys? Well, there's guys coming in, help with that, and we'll talk about some of those guys in a minute. But I want to talk about a guy that you mentioned earlier that there is a conversation around. There's a conversation to be had. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it will go the way Duke fans want it to necessarily, but that's Patrick Gongba. Um, Here's the thing about Pat. He has maybe the most complex conversation of anyone on this list because he is a projected. His draft stock has varied greatly throughout the year, from people thinking he could be as high as maybe the 10th pick to as low as flirting with early second round. Um, and a lot of that is because he has some abilities that and intangibles that translate brilliantly to the NBA. He is a next level passer. He has a really good bag of post work. He's a little bit weaker in the paint, though. Frankly, his shot hasn't been quite what he wants it to be, but he's got the mechanics there. It can be grown. It can be made into what it wants to be. But the real reason why his draft stock is so finicky is his health. He had a track history with injuries in high school, and while he avoided it for most of his freshman season at Duke, it has crept back on him this year at the end of the season, and teams are taking notice of that. So the conversation really is, if Patrick Gongba's agent is telling him that team intel is saying you're a first round pick, with his injury history, it's going to be really hard for him to not go to the NBA if they're telling him he's a first round pick, because he could come back to Duke and sustain a more meaningful and a worse injury than he had this season. And he's a year older, not to mention, and suddenly teams are going, now you look more like a 45th pick. You're a guy we'll take a burner on because we have 2 second round picks, right? And so the conversation might be less about, is Patrick Gongba ready for the NBA? I think in a lot of ways he's not. I think we saw a lot of that in the UConn game. I think there are a lot of ways that he is ready for the NBA. He plays more of an NBA style game than he does a college game. But I think that conversation is less about, is he ready, and is it the time for him to go to the NBA? Does it make sense for him on a timeline perspective to make the jump to the NBA? My personal opinion is that yes, it does. And I think that he will enter the NBA draft.
Well, it would probably be smart in the sense that he played with Cam Boozer this year. Cam Boozer made him look really good. They worked so well together in the 2-man game and around the basket that his stock may never be higher than it is right now. I don't see that person on the Duke roster, at least not right now, for next year. But on the other hand, he has the opportunity to really distinguish himself as the guy in the middle next year, and we really need him. So, from a greedy, selfish, personal perspective, I would love for him to come back and help fill that gap on the roster for next year. But he has to do what's in his own best interests, and the age thing, the injury thing. Yeah, he would probably be late first round material. There'd be a team out there willing to take a chance on him. So sometimes you got to just grab the cash when it's available.
Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint is that if he came back to Duke, he would have a big role. He could be a guy that's flirting with 15 and 10 a game. And if he's fully healthy next season, next year's draft class is considerably worse than this year's draft class. That is an argument for a few of these guys that are going to be mulling over decisions. So, yeah, he could go even higher in next year's draft class if everything goes the way he wants it to. That's a variable that's difficult to play with, right? I think Patrick could be a guy that is going. I think it's almost a given that he's going to enter the draft, right? The question is, will he pull his name? I think there's a chance if the intel is that the scouts are really they're kind of nervous about some of the things they saw late season and some of the injuries, and he needs to go prove a little more at Duke, and he would actually make more money at Duke than he would being a possible second round draft pick. If that's the situation, then maybe there's an outside chance that he comes back to Duke. But talking about the weighing what the drafts look like, I think is a really important discussion for this next guy in this next tier, which is occupied solely by Dame Sar. I think Dame Sar is maybe the most 50-50 decision of anyone on this roster. When Dame Sar committed to Duke, I don't think there was ever any intention that there would be a second year in Durham. Like, they pulled this guy, he was already a professional basketball player in Spain. Um, it was always kind of meant to be he's there for a year and now he's going to go play in the NBA. But his draft stock's not very high. It's like mid second round, which is dangerous territory. That's the territory where you could go to the combine and you could impress scouts and make yourself a first round pick. Or if it goes poorly, you could find yourself being undrafted. It's very, very dangerous. We saw Cedric Coward in that position work his way up to the lottery. We saw Terquavion Smith from NC State be in that position, and he was undrafted. It's a difficult place. It's a really difficult decision for Dame Sar because there are so many ways in which he is not ready to play in the NBA. His transition game, not great. I'll say it did definitely improve. His finishing has left a lot to be desired at times. His consistency as a shooter, and especially as a free throw shooter, has left a lot to be desired. But he has shown strength as a shooter at times, a lot of strength, and shown an ability to be a very good 3-and-D player. His archetype fits the NBA to the T. And if any NBA team is willing to be a little bit patient with him, they could absolutely take him this season. Let him develop a little bit before he could possibly become a rotation piece on an NBA roster. Obviously, there is opportunity for Dame Sar to improve at Duke next season, to become a much better player, possibly improve that draft stock to a guaranteed first round pick in a weaker draft class next season. But at the same time, you have to look at who's coming in. Bryson Howard, who's also coming back. Nick Kaminia, and he has an expectation that his role will increase next season. And so you've got guys that are coming in and they want their piece of the pie. And Dame Sar, if he does return to Durham, is going to command a rather large slice. And that does change the dynamic of the team. I don't know what Dame Sar's decision is going to look like. This is the one that I am the least certain of. For most of the season, I have leaned towards Dame Sar is going to go to the NBA. Same as Pat, he's probably almost certainly going to enter the draft. Whether he stays in, I don't know. We'll see. But as we've approached the end of the year and got to it, it's like the way the season ended is pretty good motivation for somebody to return and want to right the ship. And I think he's a heck of a competitor, and I think he's going to want to do that. I think there's so much opportunity for him to improve. But I do think that the NBA is going to be a really enticing place for Dame.
Well, personally, I don't think he's ready. He has improved. His shot making from the outside, especially, has improved. He has learned how to dunk the basketball, which is can't dribble it particularly well. Still, he's definitely still raw and gets like an excited puppy dog sometimes. Gets ahead of himself and needs to learn how to slow down and finish off of 2 feet. But yeah, will a team take a chance on all that raw material? All the raw materials are there, but the finished product is not. I think he would benefit from another year at Duke, developing, having. We've seen so many guys who go too soon. They end up in the G League. They never make it to the pros because they can't develop. And Duke is a good place to develop and also get paid a lot of money. So, I mean, personally, I think he ought to stay. I think he needs another year. I don't think he's ready. So, but NBA is all about the future and what they project you to be in the future.
All right, next category is a happier talk for Duke fans because this is I really don't think there's much chance that they leave at all. That category is Caden Boozer, Nick Kamenya, and Sebastian Wilkins. Wilkins pretty obviously wouldn't. I mean, it would be kind of crazy for him to enter the portal after redshirting a season. Kamenya, as I mentioned, I think he's got a role carved out on next year's team. I think he showed a lot of promise at the end of the season. There's no threat to him going to play pro ball, and I don't see any avenue for him entering the transfer portal or any real reason for him to. And then Caden Boozer is a guy that I've seen over the last day, people talking about he's not going to come back because it's going to be crowded in the backcourt with the possibility of Caleb Foster, with Deron Rippey coming in. And there's just too many mouths to feed. Boozer's going to find himself as the odd man out. I've seen people say that he'll enter the portal, that he's going to enter the NBA draft. His stock is not high enough to enter the NBA draft. It would be foolish. He's not going to enter the transfer portal, man. No chance. In fact, actually, I'm probably the most confident about Caden Boozer returning than anyone else because he has so much opportunity. He showed incredible promise at the end of this season in a way that I think he could have a sophomore breakout season like Trey Jones had in 2020, where he could be, one of the best players in the ACC if he plays his cards right. He showed that he can get to the rim and finish with consistency. He can score around 13 to 19 points on any given day whenever he wants to. And when he's more of a focal point of the offense, when you don't have that anchor that is Cameron, he could become more of a focal point on a certain day of the offense. It could be more centered around him going and getting a bucket. And he's got so much opportunity to create a draft stock for himself to become a draft pick next season because everybody was Cameron, Cameron, Cameron. 26, 27 can be Caden, Caden, Caden. I am maybe as excited about him as I am about anyone on next year's roster.
I agree with you on that assessment. The backcourt is going to be very crowded potentially if we have Caden and Caleb and Rippy. And who am I missing?
That's pretty much the gist of like the point guard style players. I mean, the rest of them are kind of wings.
Yeah. So somebody is odd man out potentially there, but I don't think it's Caden Boozer. He's everything that we hoped he could be. I mean, just Mr. Reliable getting to the rim. And the only thing he really needs to improve is that outside shot of his, which was not so reliable. And maybe cut down some of the turnovers. But he's strong. He is strong. And he can get to the rim when he wants to. And we really do need that piece for next year.
We had similar criticisms levied against Trey Jones as a freshman. He shot the ball pretty poorly from three. He definitely improved that aspect of his game. I'd like to see where Caden can go from a defensive standpoint. Obviously, Trey had a higher starting point as a defender than Caden does, but I do think he's got a lot of room to grow. He does have good positional size, better positional size than Rippey does. Obviously, Caleb Foster has a lot of size. Caleb Foster is the next guy I want to talk about. I have him in a tier of his own. I nearly had him in that previous tier with Caden, Nick, and Sebastian. But I held off on that for a couple of reasons because of how crowded the backcourt is. It's really difficult for me to imagine Caleb Foster leaving Duke. He has made comments about how other guys make these decisions to transfer. He doesn't see that in himself. He wants to fight through it, go through the hard times. There's also the side point that's like Caleb Foster knows he's not going to the NBA this offseason. He knows he's not fighting to be a drafted player. Like, if he gets to the NBA, it's going to be through determination and hard work, fighting through the G League and the Summer League, right? Like, he's not going to be a guy that hears his name called. And I think he knows that. And so he knows that if he jumps ship and goes somewhere else, what's really the point? He's been building all this at Duke. He wants to be a part at Duke. He grew up a Duke fan. It is almost unimaginable for me to think about Caleb Foster wearing a different jersey next year. But at the same time, he does seem like if there is an odd man out in that group, it could be him because Rippey is just so incredibly talented. It seems hard to think that he would come off the bench. Maybe he will, though. Maybe he will. Duke's got two really high-level starting caliber point guards coming back. And Foster can play off ball. But I have him a slightly below those other three guys because I think there is a tiny chance that he could transfer, and that tiny chance is attached to the fact that I don't know what his graduation path looks like. Obviously, he could have gone through a 3-year path. He could be getting his degree from Duke, and if that's the case, it could be time just for him naturally to move on as a person. But I do think that he knows the pain of the Houston loss. He knows the pain of the UConn loss, and I can't. It's really hard for me to imagine him walking away from that.
Yeah, he's sort of in that same awkward situation that Jeremy Roach was in, where not going to be a pro. He's a good player. Um, does he stay or does he go? And Jeremy, of course, ended up in a Baylor uniform, losing to Duke. And I agree with you. I think Caleb stays, and he's really the quintessential kind of player that we need to be successful as a program who isn't good enough to go to the pros, but he's very good and can be a 4-year player, which is such a rarity nowadays. And he could really be a valuable piece of the team next year, not just his playing ability, but his leadership.
So the final tier is like heavy portal threat. Like I expect them to enter the transfer portal, and this is occupied by one man. It is Darren Harris. When I look at next year's team, it's hard to imagine Darren Harris having a larger role than he had this season. I mentioned Nick Kamenya. I mentioned Bryson Howard. Those guys look to be ahead of him in rotation at similar positions. You have, if you do in fact have Caden, Duran, and Caleb, all the minutes at the 1 and 2 are almost completely occupied by that. And if Dame Sarr comes back, you can kiss Darren Harris goodbye. There's like literally a 0% chance he doesn't transfer if Dame Sarr comes back. Now, if Dame Sarr goes to the NBA, I think there's an outside chance Darren decides to run it back for year 3. I don't think that Darren holds any ill will toward Duke or anything. I think he fought hard to be a part of the rotation, but it was really difficult for him to crack. I don't think it's going to be any easier for him to crack that rotation next season. And all power to him. I think there are a lot of Power 5 teams out there where Darren Harris is a starter. He's a double-digit scorer and playing a much more meaningful role than he does for Duke. I'm not saying that he can't find a way to jump somebody in rotation and play if that's the battle he wants to fight. It's just not going to be an easy war to win.
Yeah, I don't see him leapfrogging Haminia or Sarr. And then we have Howard coming in, Cameron Williams, who likes to play outside. Yeah, there's no room at the end for Darren. And unfortunately, he was a bit of a disappointment. He got spot minutes, and it's really hard to turn it on and off like a light bulb when you're put in the game and asked to produce on such a short leash. But he didn't, for the most part, produce. And he probably will be better off somewhere else.
So let's take a look at the possible rotation. Let's start with the guys that were very confident, or at least somewhat confident, will be back in a Duke jersey. Your backcourt players, point guard esque style players, and there's been a lot of criticism from people on social media that I saw from journalists that were saying, here's the reason why Duke hasn't been able to win the national championship. They've had these elite level forwards, these elite bigs. They haven't put the most important position in college basketball next to them. At least those are their words, at least. And they haven't had the high level point guard, the championship point guard. They haven't had their Tyus Jones, their Quinn Cook, their John Shire, their Jay Williams, their Bobby Hurley. They had Trey Jones as a freshman in 2019. He wasn't quite ready for it. Caden as a freshman this year, maybe he wasn't quite ready for it. I think he could have been. I think he could have been good enough to be the championship point guard this year. And then they didn't really have a point guard last season necessarily. I mean, they played Sion and Tyrese there, but neither of them necessarily a natural point guard by position. But next year, if that's what your criticism is, that's why you think Duke can't win, throw that argument out the window. Caleb Foster, Duran Rippey, Caden Boozer. That is a full backcourt rotation. It needs nothing added. That those three guys can occupy all the minutes. One of them can get hurt. It won't really matter because they can all play point guard, and then you just add more minutes to one of the wing guys that I'm going to mention in a second. I think that if Foster and Boozer are back, there is no need to add anyone else as a true backcourt player. You're done. You got the three. Now the wings, we said that Nick Amenya is almost certainly back. Bryson Howard joins him there. Sebastian Wilkins is sort of like an in-between guy. He can be a wing, or you can stick him at the 4. He can't really play the 5, but you could play a little bit of a smaller lineup. He's 6'9", but doesn't really play like a big. But you could play him at the 4 if you wanted to. But I've got him under wing, and that's Hemenya, Howard, and Wilkins. In theory, could be fine as your wing rotation, because you would probably only start one of them. It'd probably be Hemenya or Howard fighting with one another for that starting position. The other one becomes like the 6th or 7th man on the team, and then Wilkins is kind of a little bit of the deeper reserves, more of playing a Darren Harris level of minutes next season, perhaps. But that's a fairly complete rotation. Now, if you throw Dame Sarr in there, then it's like you have no reason to even for a second think that you need anything else on the wing. I really do think that they're probably fine from a rotation standpoint. With or without Dame, they can make it work. I don't think they need to add anyone from the portal in the backcourt or on the wing if they had these guys coming back. Now, Biggs is where we have the most questions. Malik's out. Cameron's out. You're bringing in Cameron Williams. Cameron Williams could be this team's best player. Absolutely. You could have your 4 being the team's best player. Duke's seen that so much throughout the one and done and NIL eras. He's a Kevin Durant level of mobility type 7-footer. He's going to be a very, very good player. But besides him, you don't have a lot. You have Max Mayer coming in, who's a freshman, but he's more of a practice type player. He's not going to see legitimate minutes most likely. He'll be more of a Christian Reeves type role. You won't see him on the court a ton, at least not his freshman season. So you want legitimate rotational pieces. At this point, if you want to play Williams at his natural position, which is what I would prefer to do, play him at the 4. You don't want to play him at the 5. We don't want another Kyle Filipowski situation where you've got a guy that doesn't really need to be at the 5. You need a center. There are 2 avenues to fill that role. You can go the portal route for your starting center. I think there's probably a lot of Duke fans that want to. But there is a guy named Sion Keita who is another African center, a 7-foot tall guy. He's very lanky. He's a very effective shot blocker. Shades of Kaman Malawach, shades of Derek Lively. He fits the bill almost perfectly of the kind of big man that John Shire has grown to like in his rotations as his starting center. Now, there is the question, will John Shire decide to deviate a little bit from the play style that he has established through 4 years? Will he not necessarily go for the rim-running, lob threat big man that he has loved so much for 4 years? But if he doesn't, if he keeps on that style of play, Keita is a fantastic player to fill that role. He would be a true freshman for Duke. I think there is a strong probability that is option A right now at the center position. But even that said, I said that they might not go the portal direction for their starting big man, but they're going to need to hit the portal for somebody in the paint, unless Patrick Gongba comes back. That solves everything. Patrick Gongba comes back, he's the starting center. Maybe you go get Keita to be the backup, or you go to the portal to get a backup. You're probably going to need to go to the portal to get a backup either way. I do think that's the direction they're going. I don't think they're going to go after a million guys in the portal. Please don't get frustrated if they don't. I think they'll probably get your Jack Scotts, your Cale Catchings, your practice players, grad transfers. That'll happen again. But I do really think that there is really only one meaningful rotation spot available to a portal acquisition, maybe 2 if there are more guys that leave than I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think the middle is the biggest question mark of them all. We seem pretty set at the guard and wing, and Cameron Williams with his versatility. But yeah, we don't. That's the biggest question of all. And I guess Ife Ochukwu is not going to be the answer.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so got to figure that part out if he's looking iffy.
Yeah, there's a long off season ahead of us. We now are in the era of literally everybody has to make a decision. And pretty much everybody on this roster will have some sort of decision to be made in some way. I don't expect there to be a ton of we're going after this guy and 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 this guy. Like, I think there's going to be a very targeted pursuit of a couple of portal players, maybe. And like I said, they really only need one meaningful one, maybe two, depending on how the rest of the roster moves shake out. I do think that Sion's going to be on their radar still. He's been on their radar for a while. I think he is an answer. I think there's a possibility that he has been waiting for Patrick Gongba. And if Patrick Gongba does leave, I think that the recruitment could ramp up for him. I think if Gongba comes back, you can pretty much go ahead and say Duke's not involved there anymore. There's so many things to play out in the coming weeks. And so while your hearts are still recovering from the brutal UConn loss and the increasingly brutal losses every single season now in the postseason, you can at least throw some optimism toward next season, or you can try to at least, and say, well, the roster's looking pretty good. It could look pretty good next year. I do think that it does look pretty good. You might not have quite as heavy a hitter as a Cooper Flagg or a Cameron Boozer, but you've got pieces. You've got opportunity to build a really compact and strong rotation here without needing to add a ton to it. And so we'll dive deeper on these decisions as they come in. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about guys that are on the radar. Will there be another Cedric Coward-like acquisition? Who knows? The offseason is going to be a long one, but we're here for the ride. Thanks so much for listening. As always, go follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram, Twitter, and wherever else we're at. Go subscribe to the podcast wherever it is you are listening. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you guys later.